Hello, hello. Welcome to our CISM live series, where we connect with critical incident stress management subject matter experts live on YouTube. My name is Kelly, and I'm the development coordinator and the host of our CISM live series. If you enjoy any of the content being shared today, please make sure to give this video a like and also subscribe to our YouTube channel to be notified the next time we go live. My guest speaker today is Dennis Potter, who is a licensed social worker who received his bachelor's degree from Grand Valley State University and a MSW degree from the University of Michigan. He was a founding member of the Kent County Crisis Response Team, the Midwest Michigan CISM team, and the Michigan Crisis Response Association. He is recognized as a fellow by the American Academy of Experts in Traumatic Stress. Dennis is also the CEO of Cantu Consultants. Welcome, Dennis.
Thank you, Kelly. All those things just mean I've been around a long time.
That's absolutely right. You know your stuff. You've been doing this for a long time. So today we're actually going to be discussing a special World Congress 16 presentation preview regarding the topic of crisis management briefing, or CMBs. So can you give us a brief history behind the development of the crisis management briefing, or CMB?
Sure. I wish I could say it was my idea, but it wasn't. It actually came about in an incident that happened in a public school.
So today we're actually going to be
a public school setting just north of town. My friend Paul and I had trained their team, and so we were had been involved with the school team for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And three young women, teenagers, seniors, I think, were killed in a car accident. And
oh, wow.
the team went in, their team went in, and they worked with the kids, but they called us and said, you know, there's some rumors going around about high speed and drugs and alcohol and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And those are being very destructive. And so he wanted to do something. So he organized a parents' night. And the state police investigator was going to talk about, this is the no drugs, no alcohol, you know, the facts of the situation. The principal was going to talk about what their team had done with their children. But the topic of the night was going to be how to help your team grieve.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the educational presentation. And my friend Paul actually delivered that. I was in the audience kind of backing him up. And I remember watching, they expected maybe 50 people to show up, and 250 people showed up. And I remember thinking, wow, this was a way of getting information to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. in a 40-minute presentation, and Paul's end of it was about 15 or 20 minutes. And so I remember thinking, you know, in the early days, we focused all of our attentions in critical incident stress on the primary participants, the people most dramatically directly involved in the event, and everybody else was just kind of left out. And I remember thinking, wow, this was a way to get kind of everybody else. So we started playing around with it, and as did many people. And eventually the foundation created and named it the Crisis Management Briefing.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's an amazing history. So yeah. What would you say is the primary purpose of a CMB, or crisis management briefing?
Well, I think it falls from my perspective, everything we do in critical incident stress management is educationally focused. We're giving information to folks that other people have found helpful for getting through it. And so I think this is especially true with a CMB. We want to keep it short. We want to do, 15 to 20 minutes, but we want to focus, I think, on what are some of the most common reactions people have to an incident that they just experienced. Mm-hmm. To validate that reaction that they're having, validate normal reaction, normal people. You've probably heard that before. Mm-hmm. And then to give them some ideas on things that they can do to be helpful for getting past it, kind of a thing. And so one of the things that as we were evolving that, or as I was involving kind of how I was doing it, I noted that when other folks were doing it, everybody was just kind of winging it a little bit, kind of doing it on their own. And one of the things that really attracted me from the beginning to the ICISF model was that it had a structure. If you're going to do a diffusing, you've got a 3-step process. If you're going to do a CISD, you got a 7-step process. If you're going to do one-on-ones, you got the SAFE-R structure that you can individualize in terms of your how you go about doing it. But when you stay with the structure, you know, there's some uniformity and predictability, if you will. And so the CMB became, I began to focus a little bit about maybe there were some ways of focusing how you do it without creating too much of a structure per se.
Okay. So who do you think might benefit the most from a CMB then?
Well, I think originally our thoughts were that this was for, when you think about the ripple effect, the folks in the second or the third or the fourth tier out, not so much for the primary participants who might be more intensely impacted. And I think that is always where I go to look at everybody else in the organization or in the department. So if we, for instance, if we were responding to an event that was happening in an emergency department of a hospital, we'd be looking at a diffusing and or a CISD for the people who had hands-on in the curtain and were directly working with the patient. But what about everybody else that works in the ED that may not have been there, but are still affected because, oh my gosh, it could have been me. Okay, and in that case, not only what you're focusing on is self-care, but I want to touch on, here's some things you can do to help your friends who might be more intensely impacted because they did have the hands-on.
Right.
So I've also discovered that at times that if you don't have enough time to do a diffusing, because people are getting ready to go home, it's in the end of a work shift or whatever, the CMB can be used even with primary participants to give them the ideas. Here's some things you can do to take care of yourself right now. Take care of yourself tonight when you're going home. So if I've got 30 minutes or less to work with people, I'm going to do a CMB with everybody I can get my hands on, because I want to give them something before they go home, and then negotiate on the possibility of doing a CISD or something the next day or two.
Right. So you may have mentioned a more structured approach when doing a CMB.
Yeah.
And I'd like to ask you to kind of expand upon that and kind of explain the why behind that.
So part of this comes, I worked for an organization for 3 years as their manager of training and consultant relations. And we had about 3,000 MSW, Master's Prepared Clinicians across the country. And our primary customers were employee assistance programs. So they would have an event in one of their covered lives, but they wouldn't have staff to go respond to it. So they would hire us, and we would look at our network of folks, try to find somebody within 25 miles or 50 miles to kind of go in. And then I became we were doing about 1,100 calls a month. So it's a busy place. And that's where I really wanted to strive to get some uniformity in how people, my consultants were doing it. And so I came upon this kind of as I was working with them and sometimes handling some complaints. And to our credit, out of the 1,100 or so folks that we had responses, we would have 8 to 10 complaints. And most of the time that was around people being late, not so much about what were they doing. So I wanted to encourage them to come in a few minutes before they were scheduled to work, meet with leadership, and talk with leadership about the possibility of hosting what we were calling in that day an educational group briefing, because it was a more neutral term to talk to leadership about. And that structure then would be about getting the people together, and then the leadership would give a few words of introduction, and they would use, we were using the CMB model. So the leadership would give some factual information about what actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I purposely spend time with leadership to go over what they say. I don't want them to write a script, but I want them to come up with 3, maybe 4 bullet points. That what are the facts of the situation as we understand it right now? Because as you know, Kelly, as a situation is evolving, more information becomes available, which expands or changes our impressions of what happened, greater knowledge.
Correct.
Not alternative facts. I'm talking about more information sometimes changes our understanding. So I want the leadership to maybe start with a statement of condolence. I'm sorry this has happened to our company, to our department, to you. These are the facts as we understand them right now. And then turn it over to us. And so I think, again, what I want to do when I come in is I want to have an understanding of what the event was, so that I can talk about common reactions people have to the particular event. So while the common reactions, we all know guilt and anger, and I've added grief as the 3 universal reactions to all incidents, but they're slightly different. If you have an unexpected death of a colleague due to a heart attack off-site,
Right.
so now you're coming in and you're going to be talking with their department partners, their social network in the office. I'm going to talk about shock and denial in a slightly different way than if I'm going to talk about someone who's completed suicide, or there's a workplace violence, or what. And then
those are different. They're different scenarios. So I mean, the way that you approach each department, agency, organization, or individuals as a group is going to vary. Absolutely.
So while the theme, shock and denial, is there, you personalize it to the kind of event and who you're there for. Guilt in the aftermath of an unexpected death of a colleague, health event kind of a thing, is around unfinished business. It's not guilt that I could have, like we do with first responders, oftentimes their guilt is I should have been able to have a better outcome. In this case, guilt is around unfinished business. I should have been able to, I should have thanked them. I should have let them know how much I appreciated that, all that kind of a thing. Anger can, again, always be towards a spiritual being. If they have a faith tradition, anger can be at management. Anger can be itself if at the person who committed the act, if it's a perpetrator or in a suicide situation. And then last, the grief issue that I typically tend to address is around you've lost a colleague oftentimes. And we understand that grieving, but there's a grieving of some intangibles that occur, in my belief, in the aftermath of critical incidents. If it's a violence in the workplace, it's a loss of sense of personal safety. A unexpected health event kind of reminds us of our own potential mortality. If it's the death of a colleague's child, if we have children or grandchildren in that age, so that loss of sense of safety, mortality. And what I teach to then is these intangible losses. We grieve in the same process of grieving the loss of someone we care about. It kind of comes and goes in waves, that even in between the waves and when they're high and they're close together, we get a few moments of sanity, a few moments of normalcy. And over time, those waves come down and they spread out and we kind of get back to who we were before the event. So I think it's important to teach to those kind of generic issues. And then I come back with a 3-parter. And the first is, here's what you can do to take care of yourself. And this is the standard stress management stuff that we talk about. Reduce caffeine, reduce alcohol, try to get back into your routine, eat a little healthier, get rest as you can. those kind of things. Those are the standard kind of stuff that I think we should teach every time we go out. Then the next one is, so here's some things you can do to take care of each other. And here's where I want to talk about checking in with one another, being honest with one another. Yeah, I'm still wrestling, or I'm getting a little better, but giving them permission to kind of talk with each other and be supportive of one another. And then last but not least, if we have primary participants that are going to get diffusing or CISD later, we'll talk about here's some things you can do to take care of your friends who might be more intensely impacted. Here's some things to say. And then equally important, some things not to say.
Right.
Because, and we have that whole list of stuff not to say because, you know, you look at the list and go, well, nobody would say that. The reason it's on the list is somebody has said that. Okay?
Right.
We want them not to do that. Okay?
Yeah.
Here's some things helpful. Here's some things maybe not so helpful. And then I typically will wrap it up with a statement. I used to say, I'll be down in room such and such, or we'll be hanging out if you have any questions about your reactions or that. I don't do that anymore. Now I say, if you had any questions about anything I said, come on down and chat with me about it. That takes away the stigma of, you know, if you're such a whoosh, you really need to talk to the shrink, come see me. That's a whole different thing than if you have a question about something I said, then people can come, even though it's something bothering them and they're having questions about the reactions. It's just a more neutral way of inviting conversation. One of the things that I've noted, especially when I'm working in the civilian world as a representative out of an EAP kind of background, if I'm able to do a CMB with a group and then leave that, and then they put me in a room someplace where people will maybe come see me, it increases the likelihood that someone will come down and chat about something. Because when when you arrive on scene and you're put in a room and the powers to be go out and say, well, the shrink's down in room 101. If any of you wussies need to talk to somebody about this incident, people are much more, even though they don't say it in that way. It's a little harder for people to come down. Than when we do a CMB, we get a chance to touch a lot of people.
Okay.
I did one once. I was called upon by the Ontario province CISM team. They were short-staffed and they had a tornado come through a little town that's on Lake Huron on their east shore. We're on the west shore of Lake Huron, so to speak. And they'd asked if I'd come out and help them out. And so, 3 hours away, of course, I went. And we did a CMB for the community. We had 850 people in our audience. 3 of us talked for 10 minutes. And then we just circulated in the crowd. And it was amazing how many people did come up and just kind of have a question or two or something. So it's an amazingly potentially effective way of getting a whole lot of people with minimal team members. Can you imagine 850 people trying to talk to one-on-ones? I mean, we don't have enough people to be able to do that kind of a thing.
Well,
that's pretty amazing.
3 of you, you'd be there for several weeks.
Yeah.
Trying to.
We'd probably still be there. And that was years ago.
Yeah. So we've talked about what the structure looks like then from a structured approach of a CMB. What have you noticed after using this more structured approach with critical incidents or, after critical incidents occur?
Yeah. I think a couple of different things. Well, first, I kind of alluded to if I'm coming into an organization representing an EAP or representing the team, Midwest Michigan team, then we have a chance to get in front of a lot of people and give them information. I've also, at times, this just happened a month or so ago, the Midwest team was called into a suburban police department. And it was an incident happened in a mall among teenagers. And as they drove away, came to a stop sign and somebody unloaded a 9mm, 9 shells into the other car and killed the driver. This is very rare in this particular community. It's pretty rare in my, thank goodness, in my general community here in Grand Rapids. So
Right.
it was a big event. But the team, when we arrived, it so happened they had a new chief who was a believer in CISM, but nobody in the department knew anything about it. So the chief mandated everybody to come to it, so that when we started trying to do a CISD, we had a couple of curmudgeons who, they were upset about being there. They didn't like being there. They'd been around forever. They were also not the two young guys who were first on scene. So when we got to the fact phase, and they really pushed down and made sure that everybody knew that nobody should be affected by this if you're a real cop kind of attitude.
Well, I mean, to be fair, that's been kind of the mentality, I think, since the early 70s.
Absolutely.
With not just law enforcement, but
Absolutely.
with many other crisis responder professions.
Absolutely. And it caught me a bit by surprise, because I haven't really run into it locally. All of our major departments here, our fire and police departments, have internal peer teams.
Right.
So it's more generally accepted but it was there. And so while I officially was there to talk later in the CISD process, I just stepped in as clinical director of the team, stopped the CISD, converted it to a CMB, so that I was able to educate, but nobody, the two young guys who first fatality they saw first time handling it, they didn't have to admit they felt anything. But I could talk to them about, here's the visuals that sometimes stay. And so ultimately, I think it proved to be a successful intervention, because if I'm correct that the primary purpose of all CISM activity is education, they got it. Now, we didn't turn it into an interactive. We did hang around. We did spend some time talking with everybody when we were officially done about the whole mandated. I challenged politely, politically correctly, one of the curmudgeons about the mandate. And he said, yeah, you had a question about it being mandated. He said, yeah, this should just be for folks who need it. And I laughed at him and I said, yeah. And over the course of how long you been a cop? 20 some odd years. And over the course of the 20 odd years of all the incidents you've ever been on, how many times did you actually need it, that you would admit to anybody that you needed it? And he grinned, he said, never. So times are changing. Maybe it's okay to get some information. So
Right.
we offered to come back to the department later just to do some critical incident stress training as part of their training cycle. And we'll see if we can start chinking away at that curmudgeon-y approach to law enforcement these days. So again, because the CMB has such a flexibility to it, that sometimes you can convert to it if the other isn't going well for whatever reasons. So I'm obviously a passionate believer in the CMB approach.
Okay. Yeah, we actually, we also got some questions from our viewers, which I'm going to ask you now.
Terrific. Maybe I can answer them.
Yeah. Well, here's hoping. I mean, you've been around CISM for a long time. So one of our viewers asked, where do you think the field of CISM is going in the next 5 to 10 years, just from your experience?
That's a great question, because a part of my questions over the last few years has been, how do we keep building? Because while Jeff and George never get any older, I am certainly aware of how much more gray hair I got from what hair I got left. So one of the things here in Michigan that we have attempted to do, and especially through the Michigan Crisis Response Association, which is the network of, I think we have some 50 teams that we recognize in and around the Michigan area. And we put on an annual training conference. And what I've been trying to challenge folks to, and especially those of us in any kind of leadership positions on teams, wherever we are, is how are you building that next generation to come up? Who's going to be there to take over the clinical directorship, or who's going to be there to take over the leadership of the team to keep it going forward? And I think it's incredibly important to build your successors right from the get-go, because what I've been seeing here, at least here in Michigan, is that increasing number of departments, police departments and fire departments are starting peer teams. I have just got a contract for a police department over in the Detroit area, starting up a new team. And I just heard, because I'm going to get to do some of the training, somebody here in Michigan got a grant to do 10 GRIN trainings in Michigan in the next few days, so in the next few months. So the other big thing I've been noticing, having been as part of the foundation and being on the Speakers Bureau, which means that I get to go into organizations. Organizations hire us to come in and actually train their staff. The thing I've noticed in the last 2 years, especially, is that much of the time when I'm on the road doing the Speakers Bureau training, it's in healthcare organizations. So I don't know within the hospital-based healthcare systems exactly, where that's being promoted. But I am seeing more and more healthcare systems across the U.S. The last 2 trainings I did pre-COVID, and where I was able to actually be there live with people. One was in Idaho and one was in Maine. So we were covering, pretty much across the country in those 2 trips. The last 2 trips I was able to take. Someday we'll get on. I'll be out there again.
Mm-hmm.
But it can't continue to expand if we don't keep finding people within our communities to join our teams and to be willing to take on the leadership. And sometimes willing to take on the leadership means that us old guys have got to say, I will serve on the team, but you need a clinical director now. You need a new chairperson, or whatever you call the leadership. Because all too often, and we just did that in my home team. Okay, somebody's got to be leader, who's willing to do it? Because, and then we all sit around and have excuses about why we're not willing to do it until one of us feels guilty enough to do it. But we're encouraging our newest members to step up. I'll be there. I will support you. We'll make sure that we move forward. And the thing with the Michigan Crisis Response Association that we did many, many years ago is we put term limits in the leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And MCRA in September will host its 33rd annual conference. And I'm convinced that it has survived for 33 years because us earliest board members took on leadership roles to get it going, and then we stepped back. And we've had some leadership not as good as others, but the group has taken care of itself and is now sustaining itself. So I see it continuing to expand. You can't watch a news show lately. We've had 50 mass shootings since the first part of March.
Yeah.
The need is there. The need is there.
For sure. Yeah, and making sure to nurture those leadership roles.
Absolutely.
In CISM and peer support teams, or even within organizations.
And if you don't expand it, when your leadership gets old and retires or decides to stop doing, there's no one to step in. So I think it's incredibly important for any of us in our various roles to nurture, to mentor, to encourage within our teams and within our departments to keep moving people in so that it continues to be a life of its own. I was talking with a leader of the Grand Rapids Police Department's peer-to-peer team, and I was saying, one of the things that I've been really impressed with their team is over the 20 years or so that they've had a team, they've gone through 4 police chiefs. And I said, every time you changed a chief, I was always concerned that the new chief might not buy in. And what the leader said to me is, you know what, it is so now ingrained in our culture. It's one of the questions we ask the new chief as part of the interview process.
Wow.
So that's what I mean about building it in and making sure that leadership has to accept it, because we're useful and we're useful to them.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. Those are all wonderful tips. Another person asked us, there are some critics out there who haven't bought into the CISM process. What can be said to them, if anything, to convince them or I guess encourage them to give it a try?
Yeah. So, and this is always the challenging question, of course. And I guess that I might start with, so what do you think your department needs? What do you think your people kind of need? I can go back to the basic principles of psychological education, psychological first aid that was first being touted as the replacement for CISM. And what I discovered when I did a thorough study of psychological first aid is it's a set of core principles that CISM has had from the beginning. What is lacking, in my opinion, from psychological first aid is that it relies on you to do it your own way. So if you and I, Kelly, went out and we're doing our psychological first aid in different organizations, not going to look alike. Okay, because you're who you are, I'm who I am, our respective trainings. There's no consistency. If there's no consistency, you don't know whether you're impacting for good or bad.
Well, in our life experiences, we often draw on our life experiences
Absolutely.
too. So, I mean, your life experiences are going to be very different from mine.
Absolutely. And the nice thing, I believe, and the gift that Jeff and George nurtured to the rest of us was the structure of the diffusing and the CISD. So it's still personalized how I do it, how I do a CISD or how I do a diffusing or a CMB. You would recognize the steps, but I do them differently perhaps than Pete Volkman might do it. Another going to be a speaker at the World Congress, one of my heroes, or any of the faculty. We could end up doing it so you'll recognize it, but we personalize it to our community, to our department. But there's structures to it, and that structure means that every time in my case, the Midwest Michigan team goes out and does an intervention, it's predictable, and the team members know what to expect of each other from the structure, even if we've never worked together before. And I think it's that predictability and that structure that differentiates us in CISM world from everybody else and makes us useful. And of course, there's a number of studies out there. Go to the ICISF webpage, the resource side of it, and read the studies that are out there that clearly demonstrate that we do is helpful.
One of our other viewers asked, they state COVID has changed so much about how we interact these days. How can the model be adapted to accommodate remote groups? Can it, they imagine that it must be very challenging for group interventions. How have you and your CISM team or your personal experiences been affected by COVID, and how are you guys overcoming it?
Good one, because a year ago, almost exactly, as clinical director of the Midwest team, when we shut down, I said, we will not do face-to-face. Now we got to figure out what does that mean? And I had no clue what it meant back then. Now I sort of do in some ways. Zoom, okay? With Zoom, you can do crisis managed briefings. Everybody's out there. You're getting them all the same information. They got a chance to interact back and forth. So crisis management briefings are a natural tool to do this way. The EAP that I worked for up until December, end of December, I retired from doing therapy for now. We did all of our interventions telephonically. Some were via with visual and others were just telephonic.
Right.
The first CISD I did virtually was with our sheriff's department's team. We had people via Zoom. Some of them, one guy was in a patrol car. He was off duty, but he was in a patrol car. Two guys were in a room at the sheriff's department. Three guys were in a room someplace else. And the other police officer, the peer, and I were separated. But we did a standard 7-step CISD, and it worked. They talked to each other back and forth and around the proverbial circle. Back when I worked for that organization with the EAP stuff, I actually did a CISD. They were all in a room together, and I was on a telephone in Grand Rapids, and I don't remember where they were. There was someplace we literally couldn't get a person there. And even though it was telephonic, and even though I couldn't see them, the process worked, because I would prompt the question and they would discuss it. Now, they were all in the same room. I have discovered if trying to do it telephonically with everybody on a conference call, I have not been very successful with that. And I think part of that is we are all too polite, waiting for the other person to be done talking, or we don't want to interrupt. I think but if they're in the same room, they will talk together, and you just got to listen and teach to it. So that's kind of how we've done it. The last one we just recently did one about 4 weeks ago. We did it live, but we had a room big enough that all of us were physically distant from one another, and we all wore masks.
Okay.
Now we're blessed again here in Michigan. We've our shot is going. Got a lot of people shot up now, including me. But all of our police officers that want them have gotten them. So we're able now to get a little looser, to be more willing to do in person. But I'm still, the last in-person one I did, I'm still wearing a mask, even though I'm fully vaccinated and safe, so to speak. I think out of respect, it's still an important thing to do.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So, I mean, overall, with regard to your CISM team, you've seen success with CMBs, CISDs. Would you say that any type of process would be successful using remote technology, or is there something that you may see be challenging?
I said, the challenge I see is if you're trying to do it strictly telephonic, where people can't see each other, that seems to be harder. Via this kind of a platform, via the Zoom platform, where everybody, and of course you're dealing with 6 to 8 people. So you got pretty good thumbnails that you can actually see each other. The CISD that I did that way seemed to work well.
Well, and there's nowadays, with the expansion of, remote work technology and just remote technology overall, there's other platforms other than Zoom.
I'm sure there are.
Microsoft Teams and a variety of other methods that offer, the same, if not more, accessibility.
Now, the one caveat that I will put in, the one that I did was with our sheriff's department, who were used to. They have as I encourage all departments, all organizations that have teams, they got some standard protocols. So if a call's involving a small child, a CISD is automatic. So the folks are used to, and so when we were doing it virtually, I don't know if they never heard of us before and we were trying to do it, I don't know how well that would work. I'd still try it, but I don't know if with among strangers. Again, I think the CMB would work well.
I sincerely appreciate you answering all of our viewers' questions today. Now, I know you're an approved presenter at our upcoming World Congress 16, and you are planning on speaking more specifically on the topic of crisis management briefings. So what should participants expect during this presentation? What can you tell us?
Yeah, I am blessed this year with presenting CMB and the post-action staff support. And then a new one this year called, this is for mental health folks, Understanding First Responder Culture. And that course I designed specifically for mental health people, not to do the crisis intervention. That's why we have the group and individual courses. But what happens when people come to your practice, first responders in particular come to your practice because they have a life issue. And so I think it's important for us therapists to tweak our approach by understanding culture. And we do that, we always teach to that in terms of other kind of cultures, but pay attention to first responder culture. What you would get if you tune in to see me do the CMB, the basic principles that I've discussed today, you'll get them a little more in detail, and then you'll get the chance to see a video to see how it actually works. Okay. If you come to talk about the post-action staff support again, because I'm a believer in structure, we have a structured 3-question approach to doing that, to evaluate how the team did, how you think you did, to take care of yourself and to take care of each other once again, along with a video, so you actually see it being done. And you get a chance, if you come to the pass, you'll get a chance to meet my friend, Paul Liberto. He and I basically created this structure together over the years. And you'll see him work with us in the aftermath of having done a CISD and a diffusing together. So preview's a coming attraction, more is better, and you'll actually get to see it in action if you attend either of those courses.
Well, I know I, for one, am very, very excited about seeing your upcoming presentations at the World Congress.
Thank you, Kelly.
So this year we are having our World Congress 16 from May 25th through the 27th of 2021. You can join the ICISF community from around the world at ICISF's virtual World Congress. This real-time live event features 3 days of content, connections, and community that you do not want to miss. Early bird registration rates have actually been extended through May 10th. Yay! You can learn more about Dennis Potter's World Congress presentation and view other upcoming presentations by visiting our website, ICISFWorldCongress.org. We hope to see you all there. Today, I'd like to thank Dennis for joining us today for our CISM Live series, where we connect with critical incident stress management subject matter experts live on YouTube. Join us next week on Wednesday, May 5th at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we speak with Steve Thomas and Jennifer Corbin to learn more about utilizing CISM as a community policing model in a special World Congress presentation preview. And again, if you've enjoyed the content that we've presented today, make sure to give this video a like down in the bottom, and be sure to subscribe to ICISF's YouTube channel so you don't miss out the next time we go live. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.